Okay, welcome to the Word Power Writers Workshop author interview. And today we have Cindy Villanueva joining us. She's the author of Don't Fight Mad. And thanks for being here, Cindy.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So when did you start writing? Was there something or someone who inspired you to start writing?
I come from a line of storytellers. I've been writing since I was a very, very little girl. My dad loves to tell stories and was always making things up. And so I kind of grew up in that environment and I just loved writing. So I would say, really probably from the time I was, 4 or 5 years old, I was making up stories and then writing stories, creative writing from elementary school on. Got really interested in writing in high school, and thought I might be a journalist. I actually at one point thought that I would go to school for journalism. I was the sports editor for the newspaper at my high school, and I was an athlete. I loved to write those kinds of things, and but went a different direction. But yeah, I've been writing pretty much my whole life.
Right on. I love that. Starting in elementary school with the stories. Very cool. And so I'm wondering, do you have a daily writing practice or schedule? And if so, how did you get in the groove of that? I know that's one thing that a lot of writers can struggle with.
Yeah, so does this writer. I have one friend who has she does historical fiction and she's written 3 books and she gets up every morning at 5 o'clock in the morning and she writes for 45 minutes every day. And I'm like, shoot me now. I just, couldn't I can't be creative on demand like that. I'm so inspired by people who can do that. But what I do is make sure that I write something every day. So I don't necessarily have a certain time that I write. I would prefer to do it in the evening. I'm definitely a night owl. I would much rather work until 2 o'clock in the morning than get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. So I try to make sure that I'm doing something every day, whether it's just, a paragraph, sometimes it's a full chapter. But I have learned over my writing career is called a discovery writer, in that I don't always know what my characters are going to do. Sometimes I'm along for the ride and I'll start writing and before I know it, she's gone off in another direction. It's like, oh, well, so that's what we're doing today. And then I get really excited because, it's coming to me as I'm writing it. But I would say making the disciplined decision to do a little bit every single day. And sometimes that's not writing in the book. Sometimes that's writing about writing the book or writing about something that happened to me that day. But it's just a matter of putting words together on paper or, on my computer.
Yeah, that's really wise. And I love that, trying to write a little bit every day. And yeah, sometimes not actually writing on your creative project. Sometimes you just got so much going on up there that you just got to get it out,
Yeah.
and it's
Well,
therapeutic.
and I will say too, one of the things that's really important is to not beat yourself up and not, because there's nobody who's holding a gun to your head and says, unless you're, Stephen King and your editor's saying, hey, you've got to have it by such and such a date. None of us is in that position. So it gets published when it gets published. And as long as you're remaining true to yourself and you're exercising that muscle in some way every day, like I said, some days I write about writing. I don't write the thing. Don't beat yourself up. Spend 5 minutes, spend 5 hours, but do something every single day. Honor that gift that's inside you that wants to come out.
Yes. Yes. And Stephen, if you're listening to this, we would love to have you as a guest on the workshop. Okay, so my next question is, what do you love most about writing as a writer?
I love words. I'm such a word nerd. I love words. I love creating something that didn't exist before. And even if you're writing, see spot run, if you're writing something that comes from you, you're the only person who could do that. You're the only person who's putting that together. And maybe you're stringing words together in a similar way somebody else is doing it, but your scene is different. Your character is different. Your story is different. Especially like Kevin, if you're writing memoir, nobody else's story, that's your story. And if you don't write it, it doesn't get done. And so that for me is the real joy and the magic of writing, is that creative process. We as human beings are designed to create, whether that's painting or sculpting or singing or writing or whatever it is, creating babies. I mean, we are designed to create. And I think there's a real joy in doing that.
Absolutely. Amen to that. Yeah. All right. So my oh wait. And so this is second to last question for you. Do you have any advice you would give to new or aspiring writers, that are looking to start writing, maybe kind of struggling with, how to get started or get their
Yeah.
practice going?
Yeah, I think it's essential that number one, you have to believe that you have something worth putting on paper. And a lot of us will start thinking about, oh gosh, I'd love to write a book someday. Wouldn't that be cool? But we don't have the faintest idea about what that story might be. Start thinking about, what are the stories of your life? What are the stories of your family? What are things you grew up hearing that, kind of what might resonate with somebody? What are the stories that your grandpa always tells? What are the things that happened to you yesterday? And start just writing them down. When I started the book I'm writing right now, and I'm writing actually a novel right now. My first book was nonfiction. Kevin, it's the same like you. It's a third memoir, one third self-help, one third inspiration. When I did that, that's your own story. You know what that is. But then when I started dabbling with fiction, I just started writing scenes. I didn't know what I was doing. I just had this character in my head, this woman, and I would write a scene, something that would happen to her. And then, I would go back to writing my nonfiction. And then maybe a week later, something had crossed my mind. I'm picturing her. She's in Florida. She's on the beach, and I write a scene about her. And it wasn't for, I don't know, probably 6 months that someone in my writing group, and Moni is in my writing group, and this is a guy that we both are in a writing group with, who said to me, Cindy, are you going to do anything with this? Like, is this a book? Is this a story? Is there a beginning? Is there an end? Is she going to kill somebody? Is she going to get married? Like, what's going to happen? What's going on here? And I finally said, you know what? I think there's enough here. I think I'm going to turn this into a book. But I would say, just get started. Don't feel like you have this gigantic goal of creating a book. Like, just start expressing yourself and things will start coming together. You'll start seeing them coalesce around ideas or themes or trends. When I wrote Don't Fight Mad, the genesis of that was I had done a speaking engagement at University of Texas here in Austin. They're graduate women in business. They had an event, and they had like 200 women who had just graduated with their MBAs. And so they had invited a bunch of women business owners, and I own a martial arts school, so they thought that was cool. So whatever, I'm doing the keynote. And I did a speech on overcoming adversity, and I used martial arts as the metaphor. And at the end of the thing, I had a bunch of women come up to me, say, oh my gosh, you should do a TED Talk. You should write a book. And that kind of like just rattled around in my head a little bit. And so, kind of like Freya, I was thinking about doing a writing workshop, and I found, or no, I guess it was Amy. So I found Seth Godin, who probably all of you know, and had this writing and community workshop. And I signed up. And I just started kind of writing. I took this speech that was like a 40-minute speech, and I started pulling apart these 6 steps and making a chapter out of each step. But as I was writing them and people were reading them, people would ask me like, oh, I'd love to know more about that. And you did this. Well, where were you? What were you feeling? What were you thinking? And so I started writing a little bit more about me, where I thinking this is this little 6-step self-help book. Well, the more I started writing about myself, I realized, you know what, I think I'm writing a memoir. I didn't intend to, but it looks like that's what it's turning out. But it wove through the stories, the martial arts stories. And then once I got through that first section of memoir, through the self-help piece that ended up being 7 steps instead of 6, And then it was like, it just wasn't finished. It didn't feel finished. And then I started thinking about it. Once you get through the idea of these 7 steps and you've gotten to a place where you've overcome tragedy or trauma or challenges in your life, I believe very strongly that you have a responsibility to share those things that you've learned with somebody else, give somebody else a hand. And so the third section of the book was all around inspiration, reaching out, helping somebody else. And so what I thought was going to be this little slim, self-help thing ended up being a full book. And then I ended up writing a journal to go along with it that are, there are sections that as you're reading through it, you can answer the questions and you can kind of glean from your own life where you need to grow and how you can get some resolution around some difficulties and some challenges. So hopefully that answered your question, but just don't give yourself lofty goals. I don't want to say lofty goals, unreasonable goals. Don't say, you know what, I'm going to start and I'm going to publish a book by January 31st. Why? Set yourself the goal to, explore every day. Throw a few words on a page, see what they feel like when they come out of your mouth, read them out loud, read them to somebody else, move them around, have
Yeah,
fun.
I thank you so much for that. And, I really love what you said in the beginning there about believing that your story is worth telling. Because I know that that's something as a writer been working on a memoir, and that's something that I wrestle with, like, who am I, to share this with the world? Nobody wants to hear this, like, and it's like that negative little chatterbox, that comes out, the self-saboteur and stuff. And
Absolutely.
yeah, and I love the playfulness and the discovery that you're encouraging too, because just taking the pressure off. And you also reminded me that we are going to do a drawing for, you're giving away an audiobook and you're giving away a hard copy of your book and a workbook. So that's a great segue into, I know you mentioned your books, but I wanted to put the links to your books in the chat. And if you just, while I do that, if you want to just share a little bit more about your book, Don't Fight Mad.
So I ta-da. So when I was so I've been in martial arts since 1994. I started doing it just to have something to do with my kids. My kids, my 3 older kids are at that point were 13, 10, and 8. And they were doing martial arts, and I would sit and watch with all the other moms. And I had one instructor who said, you want to get out here, come on, give it a try. And so I eventually did it. And when I was a blue belt, so this is 25 years ago, when I was spar, if somebody would score a point on me, I would get so angry. I was so competitive, and I would get really mad, and I would just go harder and just try to fight back. And I had an instructor who told me, Cindy, don't fight mad. When you fight mad, you miss opportunities and you don't see what's coming. And I've never forgotten that. I mean, what a life lesson. What a life lesson. And it's not just being angry, it's being bitter, it's being resentful, it's lacking forgiveness. It's all of those negative it's guilt, it's shame, it's all of those negative emotions that mean that we don't see what's coming and we miss opportunities. And so I took that idea and then extrapolated it using martial arts, and there's all kinds of stories in the book. But the first third of the book really is memoir. My parents were kind of rebels. My dad's from Mexico, and poverty like I could never even possibly imagine. If you've ever been down to like Baja California and you see the shanties along the side of the riverbeds with the cardboard boxes, and that's how my dad grew up. And then they would travel to California to pick vegetables or cotton or whatever, and then they would go back to Mexico. Well, my dad was born just this side of the border, so he was technically a U.S. citizen, which meant that he had to go in the army. He was drafted in the army. But at any rate, he met my mom, and my mom is very white. And so in 1960, that just was not done. And they had to actually kind of flee. My grandparents on either side didn't like the match. And so I tell this story about, growing up with these two sort of rebellious and yet very, very traditional, very, very traditional parents, and how I was brought up to look at life in certain ways. And I tell stories about, when my mom was pregnant with me, so this was 1961. So even in California, of course, racism was rampant. And they were living in a small apartment, and she had gone to a duplex to look at it. My dad was at work. She really liked the place. She's very pregnant and talks to the woman who owns it. And she says, I like it, but I'd like to bring my husband after work. The woman says, of course, love to meet him. And so she and my dad come back after work, and the woman opens the door, takes one look at my very Mexican father and my very pregnant white mother, and says, there will be no half-breed children in this house, and slams the door in their faces. And that was not uncommon back then. And so I just tell stories about how I grew up, and then I kind of move into, the challenges that I ran into. I've been divorced twice. I had a baby out of wedlock. I've had a lot of things that have happened to me, and I've used martial arts as the metaphor. So we talk about, getting in the ring and getting in the right ring and making sure you have your gear, and, not fighting mad and trying new things and making sure you listen to your coach. And so each of the chapters in the middle section, that self-help section, align to each of those steps. And like I said, there's the workbook that goes along with it that helps people kind of walk themselves through it. And then in the end, it's all about, okay, living with grace. Like, you've been through this stuff. And a lot of times when we've been through difficult times, we just want to put the lid on it, put the bow on it, stick it on the shelf, and not think about it anymore. And yet what I'm advocating is that, what? Yeah, sometimes it's a little embarrassing to disclose, where you've been and where you've come. And yet somebody else needs to hear that. Somebody else, you can make a huge difference in someone's life by sticking out your hand and saying, oh my gosh, yeah, totally did that. This happened to me, or this is a stupid decision I made, and I had repercussions for years because of decisions that I had made. And so that's really what the genesis of the book was that, little 30-minute speaking engagement at UT, and it has turned into that. And then, like I said, working in writing and community and working with great people like Moni, and just kind of exploring and playing around and being playful with this character that I created. And now it's a book, and I just got it back from my editor, and I'm making edits, and I'll probably be publishing it later this year. It's called Bread Pudding in Barcelona.
Sorry, my neighbor's dog was like barking up a storm. So that's going to be your first novel, right on.
It is, yeah.
I have to say, I read Cindy's book, Don't Fight Mad. It's an amazing book. I loved how you opened it with the stories of growing up. This is a fascinating read, and I devoured it in like a couple days. So check out the links in the chat here. Her website is cindyvillanueva.com, and her book's available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. So thank you so much, Cindy, for being here. And I love your message of, a mentor of mine likes to say, take your skeletons out of the closet and dance with them. Like, there's a lot of value in the stuff that we want to keep hidden, and it can help other people. And I love that message.
That's great.
Thank you so much, Cindy, for being here.
Yes, thank you.